So have you ever gone to a hockey shop to check out some leg pads and just like felt like deer in headlights with all the different leg pads available? Or just shopping online and you're just like confused by all the different brand names out there? Or maybe you're just checking out Sideline Swap to find a deal for your next set of gear. So in this multi-part video, we're going to have a look at different goalie brands and how they differentiate their lines of pads from one another, and hopefully give you a better idea of what to keep an eye on when you're looking for your next set of pads. So when it comes to brands of goalie gear, there's mostly the main players in there. Like you got your Bowers, your CCM, your Vaughn, True, Bryans, and Warrior. These are typically going to be the brands that you see when you go in a store, when you order online. There are, however, a handful of independent goalie equipment makers. There's just a handful of them that I could find. I know that there's probably a bunch of other ones that I don't know about, so if you do know some more, do let us know in the comments below so we can all help each other out in that way. So one thing to understand about all these brands of goalie equipment, especially when it comes to leg pad, is each company will do basically two lines or series within. So it's really important to not just like find a brand that you like, but also understand the different series of leg pads within them. When it comes to leg pads in the modern era, everything is a butterfly pad. Like there's no like hybrid pad or like stand-up pad anymore. Everyone plays pretty much like a butterfly style. So when we actually look at a company's two different lines of pads, for lack of a better word, we're going to call one of them traditional, so the traditional line, and then the other line we'll call it more of a modern line. So what are the differences between these two? So overall, the traditional line is generally going to be a softer pad, meaning you're going to have softer rebounds that are going to like lie in front of you. Overall, it's going to have more flex, so you're going to be able to kind of contort the pad a little bit more. The benefit of that, of course, is going to be that it feels a little bit more connected to your leg, especially if you play more of like a less technical style. Maybe you're kind of like flopping around a little bit more. And generally these types of pads are going to have more of a pre-curve to them, or something like an S shape to them, and that's really beneficial for especially us old dudes where we have really narrow butterflies, and having that extra pre-curve is going to allow us to close that butterfly a little bit more, even though you don't have much of a hip flare. When it comes to the modern line, it's going to be usually just complete opposite, right? They're going to be stiffer overall, so you're not going to be able to contort the pad as much. They're going to have little to no flex when you kind of squish on the thigh rise. And this type of pad is going to feel like the pad's going to be kind of following you around, as opposed to it being kind of like snug to your leg, as opposed to it being like completely snug to your leg. And overall, the profile shape is generally going to be fairly straight with like a really subtle pre-curve to that. So in general, like goalie pads have just gotten stiffer and stiffer overall as the years have gone by. So even though that we kind of broke them up into two different sections here, and we called the traditional more softer and having more flex and more pre-curve, the way things are going, things are getting more and more stiff overall. So what type of pad is going to be beneficial for you? So you really want to think about how are your hips, basically. I think that anyone who has like less mobility and stiffer hips is going to benefit from more traditional pad, because when you land, it's a little softer, there's more give on the pad. Versus a modern pad, which I think is more ideal for someone who's able to play in a very wide stance. And having that more range in your hip is going to allow you to actually take advantage of that stiffer straight thigh rise in that modern pad. So because of this, I tend to always go towards the traditional pad because again, I don't have a very wide butterfly. I tend to play fairly narrow when I skate. That's not to say that that's like the end all to be all. You can obviously play with a modern style pad if you play more of a traditional style. There's nothing wrong with kind of using either or. It's just really up to what you feel is going to be best for your body. So with these in mind, it's always best that when you look at a brand is to understand what do they actually call these types of pads within that one brand. So for this example, of course, I'm going to talk about Bauer because that's what I've been wearing for the last couple of years. But if you're looking at something like True, you also want to take a look at what they call their traditional versus their modern pad. And the traditional one for True is going to be called the Catalyst, and their modern pad is going to be called the Hazardous. So when it comes to Bauer, their two lines are going to be the Vapor. So that's going to be the more softer S-shaped pre-curved pad. And their stiffer and straighter pad is going to be called their Supreme line. And it's pretty easy to kind of like figure this out when you're shopping online. Just click on one of the brands and you're going to probably see generally two names pop up when it comes to the leg pads, and typically, you know, one's going to be the more modern stiff version and then the other one's going to be the traditional one. So within these two series of leg pads, when it comes to Bauer, the Vapor and Supreme, they're also going to have different models kind of like within them, and it's also important to understand that when you're shopping online as well too. So when it comes to the Vapor line, their Pro model is going to be called the Hyperlight 2. So I'm not going to talk about the new stuff that's coming out this year, so we're going to kind of stick with last year's stuff for now. The Hyperlight 2 is going to be the Pro model. When it comes to the Supreme line, it's going to be the Supreme Shadow. So this is the stuff that's going to be like NHL spec, basically. This is what all the pros are wearing. Has all the bells and whistles. So usually it can be built a little bit better and have heavier materials in there for more protection. It's going to last you a bit longer, and also probably have some better materials in there. So within these lines, you know, you have your Pro one, and then you're also going to have most likely your second price point. So when it comes to the Vapor line, this is called the X5 Pro. So this is a Vapor kind of like mid price point line. On the Supreme line, they didn't actually have like a mid price point for the Supreme Shadow. I think the closest was the M5 Pro, which has unfortunately been discontinued. So this is just kind of how like Bauer does their stuff. They have their Pro line, and the Vapor has a mid price point. The Supremes currently don't have a mid price point. So within these two lines, they also have like an entry level price point model, something called the GSX model. And this is not something that really falls within either lines. It's kind of like it's like own thing as an entry point level pad. And I think that's like about the third of the price of a Hyperlight 2. And generally, like when you look at these pads, when it comes to like, you know, hey, should I get the Pro model or should I get the mid price point model? You really want to just think about, you know, how often are you on the ice? You know, what level are you playing at? How long are you planning to keep your gear for? The other major difference, and this doesn't apply to Bauer because all their stuff is unfortunately made overseas now. But if we look at a company like True, their Pro line is all made domestically. So that's built in Canada. Most pro level stuff is built domestically, so either in the US or in Canada. And then their second price point model stuff is always going to be shipped overseas to be built. So I know like the naming for this is a little bit odd. I kind of wish companies would, you know, pick something a little bit easier to understand instead of having these like X5 Pro, Shadow, and like different names between each of them. I think True does it really well. They have two lines, the Catalyst and the Hazardous, and the nomenclature for that is pretty simple to understand. Like their Pro line is always a PX and then a number, and then their mid price is a 9X with a number, and then their entry level price point is like a 7X and then the number. So that's always like a bit easier to understand True's nomenclature. So the other thing that I think is beneficial to understand is actually when do these pads actually come out, right? So the last Hyperlight 2 was released in 2023, and then the Shadow was 2024. And why this is important to understand is because each brand's series kind of alternates release dates. So if the Hyperlight 2, the Vapor line, last Vapor line was released in 2023, that means 2025 they're going to release the new line of Vapor stuff. And that is going to be called something called the Flylight. And then their mid price point is going to be the SV Pro, which is replacing the X5 Pro. I believe that's what that's going to be. So what that means is, you know, if we look at the Supreme line, we're going to assume that 2026 is going to be the new Shadow or whatever the heck they want to call that for the Supreme line. And this is really important for any budget conscious goaltender out there, is because now that the Flylights and the SV Pro are coming out, I think they just came out like last week, is you're seeing tons of sales happening right now on the Hyperlight 2 gear. And that mid-price X5 Pro stuff, you can get that stuff for like half off now. So if you're in the market for like the old Supreme Shadow, which was 2024, we're gonna just assume that the next one's coming in 2026. It might be worth waiting till next spring when that new Shadow line comes out. All the old stuff needs to go on clearance, and you're gonna get like a huge deal on pro level gear if you kind of wait that long. So that's just something to kind of think about if you're, maybe planning to get a new set. It might be worth waiting till the springtime when a new line comes out and you can kind of pick up stuff on discount. So I think before heading to the shop or like shopping online for stuff, I think it's it's always intimidating to see all the brands and different lines that come with it. It can be downright confusing as well too. I know it was overwhelming for me when I head into a hockey shop and I look at that giant wall of goalie pads. I don't really know where to start. But I think kind of the key things to this is just understand the series within a brand, right? So maybe pick a brand that you like, or maybe your favorite goalie wears, and just like try to understand the differences between their lines within that brand. I think it's really important to kind of see like the nuances between each of the series within that brand, because everyone plays differently. Everyone's going to have a different style, and you really want to pick what's best for you. You want to think about like how you play. How are your legs feeling, to be honest? When we're getting older, it's a little bit harder to do certain movements. So you want to try to think about what is going to benefit your body the best and give you the best ability to play on the ice. I know your favorite goalie is probably doing the splits and doing something crazy, and you want to wear what they're wearing, but I think it's always best to always pick something that is going to fit your body. Definitely always recommend, going to the store and trying things on if you can. If you can't, maybe try to get a demo set to try out. Again, just call in the store and ask if they have any demo sets you can try out. Usually you put a deposit on that for a bit, and you can kind of use that on the ice for a handful of weeks before deciding on maybe like what type of brand you want to go with. If you can't do that, maybe you can try to find a friend that has the same size and just borrow some pads and go on the ice and just try them out like during a public skate or something like that. Pads are a big investment, and I think it's always good to do your research before splurging the money. But I think that's like the big part of the fun about being goalies. It's like there's so many options on what you can try. I don't think there's like a bad option besides maybe picking a pad that's like way too big for you. And it's always like part of the journey, right? To kind of pick different gear out and playing around with it. So now that we understand the big brands and the series within them, I think the next big thing to talk about is leg pad sizing.